In 2022, UGC NET had asked this question in their English paper. It was that identify the poems which are termed as pastoral elegies, and the options were Lycidas, In Memory of W.B. Yeats, Adonais, Thyrsis, and In Memoriam. At first, it might seem that all of them are elegies, but does that mean that all of them are pastoral elegies? No, right? Then what exactly is a pastoral elegy and how does it differ from a regular one? If you're unsure about it, then don't worry, I've got you covered in this video. I'll walk you through the key traits of a pastoral elegy that differentiate it from other poetic forms and explain it with 4 most important examples that you absolutely need to know for your exam. So stay tuned till the end of this video and don't forget to make notes. An elegy in English literature is one of the most important poetic forms that mourns for the loss and honors the dead. Now, it could be the loss of a loved one, a great poet, or even the loss of an era. Elegies, with its very meditative and melancholic tone, they give voice to the sorrow, the pain, and sadness. But within elegies also, pastoral elegy acquires a very special place. Pastoral elegies, they acquire a special place because they are a subcategory of pastoral poetry. Now, what is pastoral poetry? Pastoral poetry basically depicts a very idealized rural landscape, right? It glorifies the simplicity, the purity of such rural areas. The main characters over here are shepherds, and they are also represented in a very pure and pristine manner and depicted in such a manner as if they are free from any city life corruptions. Now, being a subcategory of pastoral poetry, what makes a pastoral elegy different from a regular elegy? Understand one thing, guys, that when we are talking about pastoral elegy, it's not just about grieving for a loss of a loved one or grieving for the fellow poet. It's grieving through nature. Over here as well, shepherds are depicted as the main characters. They are featured as the mourners who are mourning and grieving for the loss of their loved ones. At the same time, the best part about a pastoral elegy, which makes it so moving, is that nature itself joins in the grief. Having said that, let's break down some of the most fundamental features of pastoral elegy that differentiate it from other poetic forms. What are these? The first is invocation of a muse. The poem begins by the speaker invoking the muse for divine guidance. He wants help to put his emotions, to put his pain into words. The second is the shepherd as a main character. As I've mentioned previously as well, the shepherd is considered to be the main character because he is the one who is mourning for the loss of his loved one or a fellow poet or a public figure. Sometimes this shepherd is also surrounded by classical figures like Apollo, nymphs, or even fauns. Another characteristic feature of pastoral elegy is that you will often find in this elegy a procession of mourners. It's like a funeral-like procession which consists of another fellow poet or, for that matter, other public figures or even nature itself. And the best part that I find about pastoral elegy is that you often find in these poems the emotional stages of mourning. So in the beginning of the poem, you would often find the shepherd or the speaker expressing his anger and protest against death. Then gradually, as the poem advances, you see the speaker or the shepherd is expressing his pain, is grieving for the loss of his loved one. And then finally, towards the end, you see the speaker is accepting the inevitability of death. In short, pastoral elegies are different from regular elegies since they include nature as the grieving companion, making loss feel both deeply personal and universally profound. Now that we know what is a pastoral elegy, let's understand it with 4 most important examples of it in English literature that are frequently asked in UGC NET English exam. The first major pastoral elegy that we are going to discuss in this video is Edmund Edmund Spenser's Astrophel. Spenser's Astrophel is one of the earliest English pastoral elegies that he wrote for none other than Sir Philip Sidney, the poet courtier, the Renaissance man who unfortunately died in 1586 at the Battle of Zutphen. So this entire poem is dedicated to Sidney's widow, Frances Walsingham. Now what happens in this entire poem is that Spenser is presenting Sidney as an Astrophel, a reference to his most famous sonnet sequence, Astrophel and Stella. Not just that, in this poem, Sidney is also presented as a shepherd and a knight, fulfilling the Renaissance ideal of a man of letters as well as of action. Since it's a pastoral elegy, what we see happening over here is that nature itself is grieving for Sidney's death. We see rivers, shepherds, and countryside, all of them lamenting for his death. The poem presents Sidney as a noble spirit who was too good for this world, and even though he may have died, his works, his legacy, and his virtues will make him immortal. The poem is considered to be the perfect example of a pastoral elegy because it follows all the traditional elements of pastoral elegy, making it an excellent case study for understanding how poets use nature, myth, and structured grief in mourning poetry. Because of all of these features, Astrophel becomes the benchmark, becomes a precedent for later works like Lycidas. Apart from Astrophel, Lycidas is considered to be one of the most popular pastoral elegies written by John Milton. It was actually a tribute to his friend Edward King, a fellow student at Cambridge who tragically drowned in the ship that sank in the Irish Sea. The poem basically begins by reflecting on the time when Milton and King were students at Cambridge and basically compares their academic journey with how the shepherds they tend to their flocks. In this poem, you see that willows, hazel groves, and even streams they're joining in for the sorrow. This is a classic example of a pathetic fallacy wherein human emotions are attributed to elements of nature, or inanimate objects. As the poem progresses, we realize that the speaker is transcending beyond his personal grief and he's talking more on the universal level. He's questioning the inevitability of death. He's focusing on the fragility of human existence and the futility of human effort. He's questioning as to why such a young and a promising life was cut short. But then he soon comes to a spiritual resolution. He realizes that Lycidas, Edward King, is not really dead. He has just moved to a more spiritual, more celestial realm. After John Milton's Lycidas set the standard, many later poets followed his footsteps and started writing pastoral elegies in that particular manner to honor their loved ones. One of the best examples of this is Percy B. Shelley's Adonais, which was written in tribute of John Keats and his untimely death. Shelley was deeply affected by Keats's untimely death, and to pour out this grief, to talk about this pain that he felt, he wrote Adonais in 55 Spenserian stanzas. Like Lycidas, Adonais also blends mourning with nature, reimagining Keats's death through the lens of classical mythology. Before we understand what Adonais is all about, it's worth knowing a little bit about the friendship between Shelley and Keats. They were introduced to each other by their mutual friend, the radical Leigh Hunt, and although their interactions have been quite limited with each other, Shelley became a very ardent admirer of Keats's poetry in no time. So when he heard about Keats's untimely death, he was completely devastated. And therefore, Adonais was his way of expressing his sorrow and honoring Keats's legacy. The poem basically begins with the speaker mourning for Keats's death and also invoking Urania, the goddess of astronomy, to grieve with him. Later on in the poem, you also see Byron, Shelley himself, Thomas More, and Leigh Hunt, all of them depicted as mourning for Keats. Not just that, but Shelley also takes a moment to criticize the Quarterly Review, whose reviews and criticisms of John Keats's work, specifically Endymion, were rumored to have contributed to his death. Now, as and when the poem advances, you see this gradual shift from criticisms to consolation. What you see in this, that Shelley is telling other mourners to stop mourning for Keats, because Keats is not truly dead. He has become part of the eternal. He is free from any kind of envy, suffering and pain. It is the living who are trapped in this cycle of sorrow and struggle. In the final stanzas, Shelley imagines Keats' soul rising towards the higher realms where other great poets like Sidney are. And this poem ends on a very mystical note where Shelley himself imagines to be where Keats is and where Keats' soul is shining like a star. And finally, the fourth most important pastoral elegy that we are going to discuss in this video is Matthew Arnold's Thyrsis. Unlike other traditional pastoral elegies which follow the classical conventions, this one is a deeply personal tribute of Matthew Arnold to his friend Arthur Hugh Clow, whose untimely death had tremendously devastated him. The name Thyrsis comes from Virgil's Eclogue, wherein there was this shepherd poet called as Thyrsis who loses a singing competition against Corridor. Now, before we begin talking about the poem and what it is all about, let's talk a bit about the friendship that was there between Arnold and Clow. They were more than just fellow poets. They shared a very deep intellectual bond with each other, especially during the time they studied together at Oxford. So this poem basically talks about the memories they had made while they were at Oxford. In this entire pastoral elegy, you find that Matthew Arnold is not only grieving for Clow's death, he is also contemplating the true meaning of life, and as a result of which you find certain shared themes with his most famous poem, The Scholar Gypsy, which was also set in Oxford countryside. In Thyrsis as well, you find this lost scholar who is finding the true meaning of life, who is searching the true meaning of life, very much parallel to Matthew Arnold's own life, own search, own quest for meaning after Clow's death. As a result of all these characteristics and features of Thyrsis, it becomes less of a traditional pastoral elegy and more personal, more tragic and more nostalgic. These are the four major pastoral elegies that you need to know for your UGC NET English exam. Apart from these, there are so many other important poems and elegies like Thomas Gray's Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, which are frequently tested in exams like these. So if you are preparing for your UGC NET English exam and you want a detailed understanding of all the writers, poets and dramatists for this exam, then you can join my live UGC NET English literature classes. In my live classes, I am breaking down the history of British literature and Indian English literature in a very detailed and comprehensive manner. I am explaining each and every literary period, followed by a detailed discussion on all the major as well as the minor writers, which will help you in tackling the chronology-based questions. Not just that, but I'm also explaining all the literary theories starting from structuralism down to eco-criticism and queer theory in a very simplified manner. I am breaking down all the complex theoretical concepts and literary terms provided by the theorists, which will help you in gaining the confidence to ace UGC NET English exam. If you want to know more about the kind of courses I offer, the sessions I take and the notes I provide, feel free to check out my TopMate page at topmate.io/Riya Gandhi. I've shared the link in the description box below, so don't forget to check it out. That's it for today's video, folks. Each of the pastoral elegy that we discussed today, starting from Astrophel to Thyrsis, it has its own unique emotion and it is frequently tested in UGC NET English exam. Which pastoral elegy do you find most moving? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you in the next one.